Hello and welcome to another edition of Ask Ron. Before we get into our main topic, I want to answer a question from a regular guy who's helped out with a lot of questions over the past couple of years. Darko Darkvis Demeski. He's in Macedonia, which you history buffs will remember from Alexander the Great, the guy who conquered the known world at the time. So he asks, Ron, why one once has been stopped with heavy workouts, first body parts who's gone, I think he means, first body parts who's gone are back and legs, and after come back again on heavy workouts, they don't respond same as usual. I'm speaking like the issue Leveroni had. Okay, I'm not aware of any actual studies about this, so I'm just going to give my best educated guess on what I've seen, experienced, and what I've come to know over the years. These are the two largest muscle groups in the body, the legs and the back. They're the strongest. That's why your bench press might be like 300 pounds, maybe 400 pounds if you're pretty strong, but your squat probably is going to be like around 500, your deadlift around 600. Back and legs are large, complex, powerful muscle groups. They're strong. They can handle a lot of weight. It takes a good amount of heavy weights to build them up to an impressive size. Nobody ever built huge legs with light weights or a huge back with light weights. They did it with legs, heavy squats, heavy leg presses, heavy hacks, especially the heavy squats. Back, heavy deadlifts, heavy barbell rows, dumbbell rows, T-bar rows, lat pull downs with good amounts of weight, chin-ups with weights, heavy weights to build the back and the legs up to impressive levels of development. So it stands to reason that once you take away that stimulus, the heavy weights, they will shrink up. I don't think that they're the first to go. I tend to think that for the most part, when you stop training or if you stop training heavy, I think everything sort of shrinks down at the same rate. But, you know, if you put it into that context that I'm talking about, things like arms, you don't need tons of heavy weight to have big arms. I've known plenty of guys with pretty damn impressive arms who I never saw use weights that were anything special. I've never seen anybody with huge legs that trained with anything less than pretty heavy weights or backs, so the same thing. So I tend to think that because they are larger and stronger body parts, if you do lose them, it's probably going to be hard to get them back, especially if you're an older guy and you have limitations. And I think that's an issue that people don't seem to really be taking into account here. A lot of these older guys in their 40s, 50s who have lost size in their legs, they have been training for many, many years. So they have probably accumulated a lot of wear and tear, injuries, things like arthritis. So they might have problems with their lower back. My lower back's been shit for years. Knees, hips, bicep tendons. I mean, all these things can come into play and can hinder your training. So if you built your legs with very heavy weights and very heavy squats, leg presses, and now you're coming back to training and trying to get them back, and you can't go heavy anymore, you're probably never going to get that size back. And the same goes for your back. If you built your back up with 600 pound deadlifts, 300 to 400 pound barbell rows, T-bar rows with plates all out to here, 150 pound dumbbell rows, I don't think you're going to necessarily be able to get it back unless you can go heavy. And maybe you'll have some success with plate loading machines like Hammer Strength. I would definitely give it a try, but that's my best theory, my best guess as to why guys lose these body parts. They're the so-called first body parts to go, and why they're the hardest to get back. It's because of their complexity of those big muscle structures and the fact that you do tend to build up the size on legs and the back with very heavy compound movements. So if you can't, for whatever reason, do heavy compound movements again for them, you're probably shit out of luck as far as getting size back. So now on to the main topic, you're not classic. So this isn't really a question. Obviously, it's not even a rant really. I'm not ranting against anybody. It's just an observation I'm making in that the majority of people competing in classic at the amateur level now, they're not really suited for that division. And I need to preface this by saying I'm not trying to discourage anybody from competing, believe me, because the promoters would have my head on a platter. I don't want to do that to you guys, you promoters. I know you need to make money. It costs money to put these shows on. And this is a business. It's not a charity, as a lot of the athletes seem to think it is or it should be. Everybody needs to make a living. I'm just making an observation because I see every Monday after after contests, well, every Monday now is there's been shows over the weekend. This is contest season. So my Instagram feed, my Facebook feed, it's full of a lot of guys who didn't do as well as they thought they should have, and a lot of them competed in classic physique. And, you know, my first observation with a lot of these guys is, you're not classic. You're I don't want to say failed bodybuilder. That sounds terrible to call someone failed. But they never were able to build enough size to be a great bodybuilder, or they didn't have the shape to be a great bodybuilder. So a lot of them got in their head once classic came out, well, here's a division that limits the weight for every height. For instance, I used to be 5'8.5". Now I'm down to like 5'7.5". It sucks. I would have to be 177 pounds in the NPC. That's the weight limit for me for classic physique. If I could get down to 177 pounds, I'd be shredded. I'd have some good body parts still, even though I'm sure I'd have to drop some muscle. You know, even if I was natural. Last natural show I did many years ago, I was over 180 and pretty damn great condition. But just because you meet the certain height and weight requirements for classic doesn't mean you're going to do well in it. Classic physique, even more so than bodybuilding, because I consider them both bodybuilding. But in bodybuilding, you can have kind of a wonky structure, funky shape, less than pretty body, put it that way. But if you build enough muscle and you get into really crazy condition, you can do pretty well. All the way up to the regional level, I've seen people win that they don't have very good shape. Structure can be, maybe their hips are wide, or their shoulders are a little narrow, or their arms and legs, something. The proportions of the bone structure, they're just not ideal. And I know that's genetic. You're born with that. So I'm not knocking anybody. We're all born the way we are. And the same thing can be said about your muscle attachments and your muscle shape. You're born with those. You can do pretty well in bodybuilding, like I said. These days, maybe you'll get up to the master's level at a pro qualifier, and if you have enough muscle and you're in good enough condition, even if your shape's not that hot, you might be able to squeeze out a pro card. It's been happening more and more as there are more and more opportunities for guys to turn pro. At the open national level, though, forget it. The USA, the Nationals, North American. Once you get into the top 5, top 3 especially, these are guys with pretty damn good structure and shape, and they have a lot of muscle for their frame, and they get into good condition. They have it all. I mean, these are the guys that are knocking on the door of a pro card in the open ranks, so you would expect that. But a lot of guys are now moving to classic from bodybuilding because they just couldn't do well enough in bodybuilding. Either they couldn't build the size, a rare few of them wouldn't do what it takes with the super supplements to build the size, but in the most case, they took all the drugs they could possibly get their hands on and afford, and they still couldn't gain the size, or they didn't have very good shape. And in all the divisions, whatever we're talking about, whether it's men's physique, whether it's classic physique, whether it's bodybuilding, ideally you want to have really good shape. You want to have wide shoulders, narrow hips, that X frame, the flaring lats, the quad sweep. You want all that. Because there is a size limit in classic physique, there's even more emphasis placed on the shape and structure. So genetics tend to be much more into play. They come into play much more heavily in classic physique judging. The best guys in classic physique at the national level, and especially at the pro level, they're very, very gifted genetically. And a lot of guys get upset when I say that, especially if I name names, because they think I'm saying they didn't work hard. It's not that you don't work hard. It's when you work hard, you look so much better than everyone else that works hard because of your genetics. That's just a fact. This is the only sport where a lot of people don't seem to accept that genetics come into play. We all realize, of all the kids playing basketball all over the country, all over the world, but let's say all over the country on the playgrounds, in the city leagues, in the middle schools, in the high schools, millions and millions of kids playing basketball, a tiny, tiny fraction of them are going to be good enough to get to the NBA. And it's not just because of hard work. The NBA is not representative of just the guys who worked the hardest. It's guys who worked very hard, had great coaching, and they had incredible athletic ability that was there at birth. They had these things, the speed, the agility, the hand-eye coordination, things that you can't practice enough for, you can't teach, you can't train for them in the gym. that natural athletic ability has to be in place in the beginning. Same thing with football. Millions of boys and young men across America play football, dreaming of being in the NFL. Tiny fraction of them will end up in the NFL. And a lot of these kids work their asses off. Their parents pay to have extra coaching and strength conditioning and all, send them off to these camps in the summers and all kinds of things. And it's, you either have it or you don't. And the same thing with bodybuilding. You either have it or you don't. Classic physique, more so. If someone's been training for just a year or so, I can always tell if they have that very gifted structure and shape. Even if the size isn't quite there yet, you can see the shape of the muscles. You can see the structure. You can see if they have wide clavicles, a small waist. You can see if the muscles are round or if they're more square. Ideally, you want those round, bubbly muscles, like a Flex Wheeler type of muscularity. Like we see on the top men's classic physique guys now. So that's the ideal for classic physique. It's beautiful. It's aesthetically pleasing. It's very nice shape. It's small joints. It's flaring muscles that flare off the bone. Ideally, you want them to be round. You want that very nice, pretty shape, like the trophies that they give out sometimes at these shows, if the promoter's feeling up to it. So, getting back to that, I see a lot of guys competing in classic at the local and regional level who have wide hips. They might have still the big GH guts from past use or current use of GH and insulin and overeating. Narrow clavicles, just terrible shape, missing body parts, and they don't seem to understand when they don't place well. They'll say, I was leaner than everybody in the class, or I had the best arms of everybody, or I had the best legs of everybody. They'll harp on one thing that they had better than most, or if not all, the guys on stage with, but they don't understand the criteria, how they're being judged, and what the judges are really looking for. And particularly in classic physique, it was created to harken back to the classic era. Beautiful physiques, Arnold, Robbie Robinson, Ed Corney, Frank Zane. These were Serge Nubret, Mohamed Mokawe, Bob Paris. These were very aesthetically pleasing works of art. They were physiques that nobody looked at and said, "Oh, that's disgusting." A lot of people now will look at someone like a Rami or whatever. You show a picture of Rami or any guy that's a big freaky guy, and the average person on the street would go, "Oh, that's disgusting. Why would anybody want to look like that?" But you show them a picture of like a Breon or Steve Laureus or Chris Bumstead, George Peterson. They're not gonna be disgusted. They'll go, "Oh, that's pretty cool." And that's why Classic is getting a ton of new participation. And I'm glad it is. I love the division. I'm happy to see it rise the way it has. I'm glad it was created. I enjoy watching it. It's a lot of new stars are being created in Classic, which is great. But, understand what you're getting into, guys. If you're a bodybuilder, you've competed in bodybuilding and, you never did that well. And it was just because you couldn't build enough size, or it was because your shape was never that great. Just know that, compete for your own satisfaction and to challenge yourself, but understand that if you run up against somebody with really nice genetics and they're in any kind of condition, you're probably not beating them, and that's okay. If the only people that competed at the local, regional, even national level were the ones with the absolute best genetics, the elite of the elite, there'd be nobody in these shows. There'd be very few people in these shows. You wouldn't be able to hold them because they wouldn't make enough money. So we need regular people who just work hard, want to challenge themselves, push themselves, see if they can beat their previous best, set a goal and reach it. And that's what really the amateur level of sport is all about. Once you're into the pro ranks, it's a different story. Now it's all about you got to win and you got to make the money and get the contracts and the prize money and all that stuff. But at the amateur level, for most of us, it should just be about challenging yourself, being your best, and getting better, being better than you ever have been before. So just know that, guys. If you're going into classic physique from bodybuilding, don't just assume that you don't have to have pretty shape, because classic physique is supposed to be about nice, pretty bodies, as silly as that may sound. But that's really why it was created. It was to bring the art back into it and bring back not only some of the old fans that had sort of turned away from bodybuilding as it became a freak show and they started seeing the big guts and things like that, but to attract guys who had no interest in getting huge and freaky, and they just really would prefer that it was about the ideals it used to be about, which is the shape, the aesthetics, the presentation, the beautiful posing, things like that. And that's what Classic is all about. So that's just my little spiel. That's it. Have a great weekend, and I will talk to you next time. Thanks for watching. Also, follow me on Instagram, please, at Ron Harris Muscle, at Ron Harris Muscle. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.